Hello and welcome everyone, those in the 24 people who are online for now. Welcome to the third already seminar of the Immigration Policy Center of the year. Today, we are very pleased to have Paolo Boccagni with us. Paolo is a professor of sociology at the University of Trento. And today is going to be the very first public presentation of the book that he just published with the University of California Press. The title of the book is Undoing Nothing. And this is the result of a 4-year ethnographic research conducted in different places in Italy. It's the second book published by Paolo Boccagni. And as usual, we are going to have the presentation for the first 20 to 30 minutes. So we have the second half of the seminar for questions. We will have plenty of time for collecting questions from the room and also those online. If you have questions online, please write them already in the chat during the presentation. And if we manage, we'll call you in later after the presentation. Paolo, thanks a lot for joining us in Florence, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. If you want to take with the book, okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks for being here either offline or online, and many thanks for the organizers of the seminar. I'm very glad to share a few minutes with you to briefly talk about this book, which stems from a form of privilege, not in the ordinary sense of positioning as a white man, etc., but as someone who was lucky enough to spend years in some sort of field work, which is a luxury probably not so many of us have nowadays. So central to it is the idea, and before that, the privilege to have, in my case, as a professor, time and resources enough to do ethnography in what I understand it to be the proper way of doing it, which is basically getting access in a field and stay there until things have happened over time and writing out of it. Now, this book started from a previous research program, an ERC research program I was doing on the forms of homemaking or home unmaking among migrants and refugee people in a comparative frame in a number of countries. But it also started from what I saw as the premise to look into what happens after the arrival of asylum seekers, mainly in this case from the Mediterranean roads. There is, in my view, a striking contrast between the hyper-visibility for a number of reasons, including the legitimate ones of all that has to do with so-called sbarchi or arrivals in Italy, and the opaque terrain of everyday life after that. As if once people are physically safe, they no longer matter unless as clients of the reception system. So I saw a promise in the opportunity to enter into this level of analysis, even only focusing on one particular place, approach from inside out over time. I saw in this also the potential to work on what a particular location in which number of people live at the same time can work out as a microcosm, in the sense that broader societal, cultural, and political issues can be explored as they sediment in the here and now, in specific location and interaction between people. So the aims of the book have to do with an attempt to foreground the life of people that typically lie in the background, at least out of the academic realm, to try and make some step, empirically based in understanding what lies behind the production of everyday lives in conditions of suspension, existential as much as juridical and physical, and to kind of find out ways for a comparative approach into a variety of forms of temporary, enforced, or anyway heteronymous dwelling. So what happens whenever people end up living in a place not of their own choice, but as a sort of last opportunity for the lack of any better or alternative one? Now, the book in itself is only actually on one place, one asylum reception center, un centro di accoglienza straordinario in the Italian jargon for this place, in which I had, again, the good luck to have unconditional access for a few years in the time spent between the old regime of asylum seeker perception in Italy, the so-called security decree in 2018, then the COVID and the post-COVID, hosting only young men, mostly from West Africa, at the stage of appeal against early rejections of their asylum claims. It is by definition a temporary setting, temporary being, however, a very unclear notion, as long as it may be a matter of years and years and years, without a clear end to be fixed in advance. In itself, the book talks about apparently very irrelevant and ordinary things, what people do there in their everyday lives, the people, I mean, residents as much as staff, going through them as a way to dive into less visible and more critical things, such as how their life trajectories ended up there, what are their key concerns at present, and what future, if any, can be seen from the here and now, against the institutional and political background of, at best, hostility towards asylum seekers. So, in a sense, I really assembled these ideas and field notes into a number of chapters, starting from a background on the politics of asylum in Italy and beyond, then focusing on the center and on a number of ways in which everyday life there is a matter of ambivalence, as I will try to argue later on, in ways that hopefully speak to asylum, to forced or anyway to migration studies, as much to a number of topics. To me, one of the important sides of migration studies is that it is in many ways a study of social and political change at large that can merge into a number of other substantive research fields, such as the one I mentioned here, ranging from youth and gender studies to material culture and consumptions to the everyday production and negotiation of boundaries between individuals and groups, up to questions of absence, memories, and even death. So the core argument is, from a very specific location, approach in a suitable, sustained way, there is a promise to expand on a number of larger and to some extent even micro topics, I believe. All this starts from a couple of key assumptions to me. What we call refugeehood, that is the ordinary lives of asylum seekers and people that are struggling for a refugee status, can be framed as mobility or possibly immobility in space as much as in existence. It can be framed as a tentative transition towards something else that is not present or achievable in the here and now, but should be under a number of conditions. Transition here means not only the geographical side of the matter, moving from one country to a hopefully modern, rich one. It does not include only the key, anyway, transition from marginality to a state of so-called normality in terms of, at least, of legal status. It's also, and fundamentally, I believe, for hundreds of thousands of young asylum seekers, particularly for male asylum seekers in this case, a desired transition from what is constructed as a state, as a way of being of childhood, to a condition of male adulthood and personhood. to a condition under which the normative expectations of being an adult person with a number of afterwards can be achieved in practice. As critical, and perhaps less discussed in the literature, is, however, another transition yet which has more to do with the ways of being of people. What I would call a struggle to move on from what we may see as an ordinary, binary way of framing, of seeing the world around us, as a matter of us versus them, here versus there, black and white, and so forth, to reckoning with the condition that has very little of an either or, but very much of an and, to a condition in which it is not clear yet where the end point is, if any, and which is, if any, the best way to achieve it. Second premise, a very orderly and, as I found out, dividing category to enter into these conditions has to do with what ordinary people in the center would call nothing, as a way of saying, what am I doing here? Nothing really, unless waiting, unless staying here because I have no other place to do while my case is being processed, and so on and so forth. Now, I see nothing as a promising heuristic into entering into what is really happening in a place, but also into what implicitly people, in this case, young asylum seekers, frame as a number of somethings that should be there, would be expected to, but they are not in practice. I will be back to this in a little while. This is a night picture of the place, just as a way of imaginatively entering it. So the thing is, it's as is typically for asylum seeker places, it's a separate and opaque space. As this is to be as little visible and relevant from the outside, in order to not to create tension in the local environment, which it is place, but still it has an inner life of its own. We may frame it in a number of ways as segregation, surveillance, control, and so on and so forth, but still there is something inside that calls for attention in its own right. Now, the background to the book has to do with a number of debates, well known to those in forced migration studies. A key point to me is the promise of approaching dwelling in asylums with a critical attitude for a number of strong reasons, but also trying to go beyond what I see as a temptation to boil it down to an exclusive matter of surveillance, of discipline and control, as a top-down form of exercise of power. The thing here, and a number of similar places, I believe has to do less with control than with irrelevance, than to an institutional ways of leaving undesired people out of the field of relevance, out of the field of what matters, out of the field of what is important in a country for a number of people, which leads to what they conceptualize as a central condition to these people as a multiple form of ambivalence. Ambivalence means to be simultaneously exposed to opposite possibilities and pressures about what one should do next, with no clarity, with no possibility to clarify in advance which the good way on is, which I will address now in a number of ways, starting from a way of simultaneously working on nothing as a category of practice, so what people say, a word my interlocutors would use, and as a category of analysis, so as a heuristic to approach a number of deeper questions. I've tried to sum this up in this table, which is typically not clear, but still the idea is trying to work on nothing simultaneously, with all the difference between myself and my interlocutors, as a category of practice, which means a way for people to say there is nothing to do here, there is no point in staying here, but also there is no point in thinking back all the suffering I have gone through, and as a category of analysis, which means trying to see behind this a struggle to articulate the conditions of irrelevance, of being far away to the expected outcomes of migration in the first place. So against the background, this idea of undoing nothing is something I would apply as far as my interlocutors are concerned to their ordinary attempts, such as for anybody, I guess, to try and do something anyway, given the constraints in which they live, and on the researcher side to unpack this perceived nothingness as a matter of ambivalence in a number of ways. So why people, to an equal extent, given the resources and the opportunities they have, do typically try in an empty and meaningless place and conditions to carve out portions of meaning, of sense, of appropriation of some time spaces of their everyday lives, with all activities that may have to do with doing something one likes, with having certain food, with praying certain gods, with doing something that matters for them. In the same way, researcher can try to untangle the multiple ways in which this stays in a domain of ambivalence in the here and now. The aim is, as far as people are concerned, implicitly at least to try to make the conditions in which they are staying less worse than they would be otherwise. And for a researcher, the point is to delve into these lived conditions in a hopefully more sophisticated way than a number of mainstream accounts of it would suggest in practice. This goes under a number of pressures. Well, these are real serious pressures for people there, clearly trying to get a job, to get the papers, to get some place to stay once they are kicked out of the center. For a researcher, there is no comparable pressure, but still the point is to try through a case study to cover something of the huge terrain that lies between individual stories of people and the societal determinants of political, economic conditions that account for their way of being there. Part of the pressure I see for the researcher has also to do with the attempt to write something that makes sense, that can speak to a relatively larger audience than those that would be involved in and interested in the same topic anyway. So the ultimate point for people like those I met has to do with getting some form of what they would call some variant of the good life, which is itself a very contentious concept on which we can expand at some point. On my side, on a researcher side, the point would be acknowledging the way the consequences of the forced irrelevance in which people ended up, but also trying discursive narrative ways to open their predicament to a larger audience and possibly to raise some more interest and concern about it. Now, to very quickly sum up the contents of the book, I have a sort of descriptive methodological chapter in which I try to undelve how an irrelevant place, such as an asylum center, which is by definition a second best place where people have to adapt to whatever they meet with little visibility and support, how this place matters in a number of ways, which can be appreciated through the routines of its inhabitants, through their ways of negotiating for thresholds, for different levels of accessibility and controls to be attached to different portions of this inner space, which is typically a place in which anyone can easily see the most visible of these paradox people end up in, which is being as much together in the sense of physically sharing the same rooms, the same corridors or courses for years and years, and alone very much at the same time, which raises a number of questions for ethnography on which I can explain perhaps later on if there's time left, but that have to do with questions very ordinary, I guess, of accessibility, of positionality, but also less obvious perhaps ones in terms of hospitality and reciprocity. In a way, having instead of all huge inequalities of power and opportunities and rights, and ethnography can meaningfully do this kind of work only as long as he or she negotiates a role of guest in particular places and rules, with all the expectations for reciprocity that this also entails, as all host-guest relations entail in practice. Now, here I'm just picking up a few field notes here and there to try and convey what the point is. A tangible form of ambivalence here is a special one to begin in. Young asylum seekers are literally, physically in a country, but juridically and socially they are not really expected to belong there or to have a right to be there until a decision, a final decision is made on their case. They end up in structures, in houses that have as much to do with protection as with control, segregation, and isolation from the mainstream. They typically live in conditions in which each portion of one's space and time needs to be negotiated with someone else, leading to particular regimes of civil indifference, as Erwin Goffman would have put it, with a number of in-outs, with the need to set divides from the outside that are typically blurred and renegotiated in practice. So the number of ways people are spatially in and out at the same time. Something similar, more critically yet, perhaps holds in time. Here there is the contradiction of supposedly hypermobile people that are actually, for the time being, the most immobile ever, with a condition of immobility that holds in a temporal sense, as long as they are at present far away from the temporality of a new better life that they were actually in the first place. A particular condition, I would say, of this kind of place, of living places, has to do with having far more time than one is able to manage or to deal with. There is a tension between little mobility and virtual mobility, or at least some scope for it, and still a number of ways in which a stuck present does not necessarily prevent people from nourishing dreams, aspirations, and to some extent projects over what will come next, over some forms of future achievable for them, at least in terms of glimpses, as it were. There is an ambivalence in materiality. Some things are present, one's own body, the people around oneself, the materiality of the infrastructure one is living in. Many more and many more important threats are absent, from the loved ones to any prospect of new and better life for the time being. Material cultures play a meaningful role, not only for people to try to appropriate the place over time, but as remnants, as tacit witnesses of what happens there over time. The whole place, I would say, and as I was saying, is among the many ways of framing it as cultural infrastructures and so forth, is also a sort of an institutional way of floating over the absent, which means all residents there have a very burdensome past they carry along. We should be, in that context, as silenced as possible. for people to try their way towards a new life, with a number of cumbersome absences in terms of memories of the past that do emerge nonetheless. So again, the tension between presence and absence is really revelatory, I would contend, in many ways. Speeding up a bit, a less obvious, more slippery perhaps form of ambivalence, but to me a very productive one for analytical purposes, is the one between what is to be taken care of and not by people sharing the same living space. There is a whole debate, particularly in anthropology, on what clean means as opposed to dirty. Here there are a number of interesting things, including, on one hand, the attempt to turn everyday methods of cleaning into a terrain of decency, of pedagogical education for asylum seekers, of showing one's own moral commitment towards the country one ends up, and so forth. At the same time, there is, to me, a revealing analytical power in where the line falls between what is dirty and what is clean, what is to be taken care of and what's not. In a nutshell, that more people feel alienated from the time space in which they're living now, the more likely is that the reach, the scale of what they see as to be taken care of collapses down to the contours of their own bodies, which is revealing in a number of ways. Last form of ambivalence to be quickly unpacked. Such a place, an asylum reception center, has some functional basic equivalence with a domestic environment, as long as it offers some degree of protection, and a number of reflexes as a non-domestic environment, which in turn opens to the dialectic between home and non-home in terms of what is the place where I feel, if any, where I feel to belong, where I feel control, where I would like to attach something of myself. And here again, as I argue, there is more than a simple statement. This place has nothing to do with home, but there is more of a tension between different aspects of opposite terms of reference, each of which bears on the conditions in which people are living in the here and now. So to quickly conclude, with apologies for being a little bit blunt, with three forms of after. What comes after this? For people who at some point had to go out of institutional reception, whatever the outcome of their cases, there are a number of struggles. Some of them are very obvious and critical, as all that has to do with finding a job, finding papers, and so forth. Something more subtle and I guess as critical in long term has to do with precisely with the need to disarticulate little by little the scale of what matters, of what I feel I can have some control and interest and attachment to. On all the way between the short term needs that are all too clear and the idea long ones that have to do with certain constructions of adulthood, of family life, and so forth. Now, what is interesting to me is that these ways of being are very much intimate and private for each of those who nourish them, as much as typically shared and common between thousands of people who tend to occupy the same juridical, biographical position. So the question to me is if there is any scope here to even reflect about a sort of transnational social question. What Charles Wright would have called an exercise of sociological imagination. If an issue, a problem is mine only, is my business, my fault perhaps. If it's the same for thousands or hundreds of thousands more, there is something societal that would call for more reflection and elaboration in a number of layers. Now, after the book, among a number of points, I would particularly like to emphasize the importance of unpacking the distance, in this case, the large distance between proximity in a bodily sense and in a moral one. I ended up with a number of people who are very much like me in demographic terms, means nothing itself in terms of a sense of emotional and affective proximity to them. As long as I have any space for myself at all, this has probably more to do with the offline one life than, sorry, with the online life than with the offline one. In a similar way, absence and presence are nothing opposite here, but they are entangled in deeper ways in everyday lives. What people see as present around them is critical for their protection, a place to be. It's by no means what matters more to them. In turn, what matters them to them more is physically absent, but holds is intangibly present in a number of ways that make a practical difference, which also opens up further to the social and anthropological studies of absence, of traces, of the difference between what is marked or unmarked, and so forth. To conclude the whole thing, really, what is left after nothing? In a way, a number of traces and memories are left there. Anyhow, at some level, for the same fact of making it safely to Europe, for the same fact of surviving the borders against the mobility to Europe, these people have left some traces of their own. They have undone nothing to some extent. However, as long as ethnography is, among other things, a claim for the relevance, for the significance of what it is about, it is my argument that a certain way of doing ethnography is also a way of doing things that can show what lies, what matters beyond the surface and the perception of nothing, by unpacking the mechanism of everyday life in particular places and by foregrounding the stories of people as such. And their claims for some would say resistance, I would primarily say dignity and relevance, as for any human being. It is my own claim to conclude that accounting, that unveiling the untold stories, the unmet claims of these people has much perhaps with ethics or with a certain normative stance, as with an analytical and epistemological one. It is also a way of making deeper sense of certain aspects of social reality in this and in a number of more realms, which means that sometimes, at least, there may be a potential for our different concerns in epistemological, in moral and political terms to find some meeting points and to work through them. Apologies for speaking a couple of more minutes. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Paolo. This still leaves us plenty of time for asking questions and bringing comments to the table. I will start collecting questions from the people in the room. I know we have 40 people who are connected online. Those online, if you can start typing into the chat your questions and bear with us because we have a camera right here in our faces and I've been told that the camera will not move. But yes, there are other people in the room and I hope that they will ask questions now. So floor is open for questions, if any. Yes, Julia, and if you can very briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Julia. I'm a Max Weber Fellow here. Just for understanding, I couldn't follow the link between the cleanliness argument and the overall argument of the book. If you could explain that. Thank you.
Paolo, is it okay if we collect a few questions? So I have Eleonora and Jim.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. My name is Eleonora. I'm a research fellow at the Migration Policy Center. And I guess my questions come from somebody who is not an anthropologist or an ethnographer. So I'm a political scientist. And in the past, I've also been a volunteer in reception centers in Italy. So I guess it's a mix of these two. So I have two quick questions. The first one would be whether you have seen a change in the years, I think it was between 2018 and 2022. If you have seen a change in the center as a result of the change in the political landscape, legal reforms in relation to receptions, because I think in some cases there has been an even more restrictive environment. And so I was wondering whether you have seen that in the work. And the second question is whether then the undoing nothing and bringing something, so the sort of nothing, is it inevitable to the setting of the center or to the condition of waiting for asylum? So it is an inevitable condition, or is it something that can be changed? Is it distinctive, for example, of the Italian reception system, you think, or it can be changed, or maybe not, or it's something that can be changed? And if yes, by whom? So I had a sense that you had also examples of something of this undoing nothing. So I was wondering if you could say a bit more about whether this something comes from the resilience of asylum seekers themselves, or comes from, for example, the staff of the centers. As I said, I had experience as a volunteer when I was younger. So does it come from, for example, from externals to the centers? Yes, I guess this. Thank you.
Thanks, Paolo. So I'm Andrew Geddes, I'm based in the MPC. And it's really, I've not had a chance to read the whole book, so I might be asking you something that's in the book. But I always think of, I mean, the people are quite young that you're talking about. I always imagine they're very connected. But often the connections we have can actually, I suppose there's a kind of connection, the virtuality of our lives and nothingness. And I'm not sure if I can formulate it as a question, but I suppose my impression when we work here with maybe younger people than younger migrants that you were engaging with, but they're quite connected. And so I was interested in whether there is reflection on the book in this relationship with connection, virtuality, and nothing, and the nothingness that you focus on. Thank you.
Paolo, do you want to take these, or we can take more as you want? One more.
Hi, I'm Maciej Grzyszkowiak. I'm a Max Weber Fellow at the Law Department. I also have some experience in working in detention centers, and I had an impression. I was wondering if you shared this impression that the limbo that those people are stuck in is twofold in a way. So first of all, they obviously wait for the outcomes of their asylum decisions. But then many of them, at least in the centers in Poland that I worked in, they don't know for how long they will be in detention. Or even some of them are told that they will be here, for example, for 3 months, because this is the maximum initial period. But then after these 3 months pass, they're suddenly told that, okay, now you're going to be placed in detention for another half a year. And this, in my opinion, played a huge role in contributing to tensions between migrants themselves, but more importantly, perhaps between them and the staff of the detention. I wonder if this is the case also in the center that you work. Thank you.
Those, we have more questions from the room, one question online, but perhaps you can briefly address these now. Yeah.
So thanks very much for the questions. The first one, how the preeminence argument links to the rest of the book. I guess it links to an extent that the materiality of everyday life under the same roof has to do with the need of taking care of it, which can work out either as a top-down obligation for residents to do their duty, to show themselves deserving of the hospitality they have access to, or as a claims of one's own care for the place one's in. Here I see the ambivalence in the sense that there is no clear-cut sense in which something is clean or dirty. But the point has very much to do with how people are interested at all or not in certain environments around them. The point is working on the tension between which is the small corner of the world I feel engaged with, and what happens when, under one's conditions, this corner is compressed down to the physicality of my body, and the larger expectations for taking care of something that exists but it exists then under the conditions of vulnerability, uncertainty, tensions, and so forth. I'm not sure if I was clear, but this is the way I'm trying to work in terms of a couple of terms that are not alternative to each other, but they mingle in complex ways in practice. Do I have seen a change over the years? Definitely. I mean, we know that, as so many more things in Italy, reception for asylum seekers varies inherently in quality depending on the local context you are in, on the welfare provisions you have in the north and south, and so forth. All this being said, the quality of hospitality, of support to people decreased in tangible ways, essentially corresponding to the cuts in public budget first and to the effects of COVID then, which means for those young residents who are lucky, skilled enough to have resources for networking, for taking initiatives on their own, nothing really changes, because a center is only the place I sleep in until I have something better than that. For those frailer, with moral suffering and so forth, it clearly made a difference and ended up in the deeply disempowerment impact of this form of humanitarianism, which means I, the state or the authority or whatever, protect you, but in doing so, I pave the way for you to be unprotected as soon as you are out in this place, because there are no forms of capacitation of support in preparing people for what will come next, unless they already are enough motivated and skilled and resources to do so. Is in this perception, this construction of nothingness inevitable? No. It is typically the perception of those, the majority, but not necessarily all in this case, who have no job, nothing to do unless they want to, unless they struggle to. It can be changed anyway, besides in the individual trajectories. If people are sufficiently supported, not just in having a bed to sleep in, but in terms of networking, of connection with the sympathetic civil society, with the creating bonds with the mainstream words. I don't think this is distinctive of the Italian reception system as such. This is simply a result of all forms of basic support that are delinked from any larger strategy other than leaving people in a parking lot for the time being, because they have to. I think, well, as some ethnographic literature shows here, and that there are important references in these ways of feeling across a number of marginalized people worldwide, which may not have immediate problems in terms of livelihood, in terms of making ends meet for time being, but are left devoid of any meaningful prospects beyond here and now. This is what I was trying to articulate. The staff has a critical role in facilitating a way beyond the state of things, as all those of us who live in this country probably know. It is typically a very mistreated kind of job in terms of conditions and opportunities. There is often an adverse selection effect, which means if a young person as a caseworker has the skills and motivation to find something more better, they are likely to over time, and those who stay there as much as the residents are typically those with less opportunity and resources in contexts other than that. Andrew, connections. The virtuality, I mean, having access to mobile phones is a resource in itself, but in many ways it can simply be a way of being exposed to the global force of communication, commodities, and so forth without having access. It is as if I were staying permanently out of the window of a shop without having access in. Connection means I know many people, mostly like me, with the same problems I have, mostly of a bonding rather than bridging kind of social capital, which means the people I'm more connected with have a very clear, implicit understanding of the conditions I am in, but do not have necessarily strong resources to cope with it. There's obviously a strong translation side to these connections with the people in the countries of origin and so forth. The thing here is always to navigate the distance between what I can afford to do and what people on the other side would expect me to do. Whenever someone on the other side thinks or perceives that being here, having made it to Europe, means I'm done, I can do whatever I like, this raises clashes in expectations. So there's all an interesting story to be opened against. I think, for instance, about remittances, which may turn as much, which may be something I wish to do, as much as something that may exert a pressure over me and over my own self-achievement in the place I'm staying, I guess. Limbo, twofold. Now, here, technically speaking, asylum reception centers in Italy are not places of detention, are not strictly places of detention. People are allowed in and out, at least during the day. They can freely move out. They can easily go away if they want to. The point be that they have no alternative to go away better than that. I very much agree with the fact that uncertainty is part of the problem. The critical thing here is that on the staff side, it's the kind of uncertainty that exceeds their remit, what they can do. It has to do with the bureaucracy of the state and so forth, but it is a clear fact that the fact of having an undefined empty time ahead of yourself, unless you are lucky enough to be supported in managing it, has a strong disempowerment impact over you. The more you share the belief that getting on the right side of the border would be enough to change your life.
Paolo, thanks a lot. We have a problem, and the problem is that we have too many questions and too little time. It's one of the good problems. I count 5 questions in the room and 2 online. If you agree, I will collect them all, and then you decide which ones you want to address. Because then at 1 we have lunch. We are in Italy, and lunch is sacred, so we can't be late for it. I would start with Julia with the first question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Julia. I'm a research fellow here at the MPC. Thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to go back to this notion of nothing that I find particularly interesting. So you were speaking about nothing as a category of practice and category of analysis, and it made me think. So we have nothing, nothingness, and as opposition to this, we have something. But for this particular group, something means like 2 choices, yes or no. Okay? So even if you get no, you have to leave. If you have yes, you also don't know what your future will look like. So basically, in this situation, something is even more unclear than nothingness at the moment, right? So I was wondering if we could see this situation, this spatial temporal situation of nothingness as more than just negative or neutral, but rather like try to maybe perceive it as something positive where agentic processes can take place, because you were showing us this quotes where one person says that finally I have a bed, I don't have to worry about what I eat, so a safety, like a basic needs are covered. Another person had this moment of disillusion that I don't want to stay here, like I hate this country, so I want to go back. So do you think that this nothingness is actually can be a place of redefinition of the final plan, what the something can actually be, if this something is something, so just nothingness that gives a space to redefine a final goal. Thanks.
Thanks. Ion, and let's keep this as short as possible, please.
Okay, I will try to be short. My name is Jon, and just thank you very much, Paul, for your book, and just a lot of terms, interesting. My question is relating with the term housing. I mean, it's very, very close to me because I'm from abroad of a fellow, by the way. It's close to me because I worked during the war in Ukraine. I worked in Ukraine when the war began because I'm from Moldova and we're on the border practically. And I worked with 2 organizations, with one on the border and with another one I worked in Ukraine, and we organized food, everything for asylum and people and within my country. But the term housing, it's very complicated according to international law, and I will not go now into the speculative humanitarian, human rights law, everything relating with this one. But did you find something kind of vulnerability in terms of the housing? Because in the crisis, the humanitarian crisis, it's very complicated to determine where is the house, or how could we determine this house? From the humanitarian perspective, housing should be somewhere where is the food or water. Because some kind of, because my postdocs right now just is occupied to the Roma people, they were split in 2 parts, and they didn't have kind of water, everything. They needed to go somewhere very far to eat something, to buy something. But what do you think could be, hypothetically, in term, maybe in years, could be extended this definition, the housing, somehow to create kind of elements to housing means that it should be food considered. And maybe we should rethink this definition at international level to create one consensus to understand how better to protect human rights within the humanitarian crisis. And thank you very much.
Sorry, but I want to let everyone speak, and we have 2 questions online that I will read. Please be aware, not everyone will be able to get an answer now from Paolo, but those in the room can go for lunch with him and inquire further. So I will read the first question out loud, Paolo, if that's okay, and you can see it on the screen behind me. This is from Nadira. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to know more about how this ambivalence and nothingness impacts identities, the individual sense of identity, and how it could change, especially in how they would relate to being somebody, being nobody. Thanks, Elona Dira. And the other question is from Georgina. And Georgina writes, thank you so much for the presentation. In tribute to Mohammed, a Palestinian who lost his life in a Belgian detention center, I wanted to ask regarding the nothingness and the stuckness someone feels, including feeling of grief when losing loved ones. Does someone mention and ask for support or mention their struggle psychologically speaking? Is any measure taken from the institution to prevent these extreme cases? Final question online from Sadia. I would like to ask that in your analysis of asylum seekers' everyday lives, do you think experiences of waiting and irrelevance differ along gender lines, for example, between men and women, or is this suspension universally experienced? We have 4 minutes to go. 2 more questions, 3, I will waive my question from the room. Do you prefer to try and answer these?
We can
give a chance to collect all of them. So please.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Nina Carlson. I'm a visiting fellow at the Robert Schuman Center. I was wondering if you could elaborate on this relation between dignity, the strive for dignity, and resistance, because you mentioned they are kind of related, but also how maybe compliance or passivity can be used to achieve this dignity. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nicolina. I'm a visiting PhD from Remeso, Sweden. I had a question about, you mentioned panopticon and kind of surveillance, and I was wondering, when these people are in the asylum process, they're probably surveilled in a particular way. Does this surveillance, the surveillance measures, or where the surveillance power comes from, does that change over time during their asylum process and also post-asylum process? Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. And my question, Paolo, in 15 seconds. I'm Lorenzo Piccoli. I'm at the Migration Policy Center, and I wanted to know if asylum seekers see as someone responsible for this time that they have to wait, whether it's judges, the lawyer they might be working with, the staff at the center, or NGOs that might be working with them, or other people. Now you have 2 minutes to answer those.
Can I start from the online ones and then follow up with
yes.
people present just as a conversation? So, right. Now I need to remember it again. Okay. This condition, in a nutshell, this condition impacts on identity as long as the people I met carried on the expectations that by risking their lives, they would precisely become someone, as opposed to the nobody they felt to be in the country of origin. So the thing is, in an immediately perceptive way, I feel as no one as irrelevant as I used to be where I came from. Which does not mean that they don't have an identity of its own right, which they nourish in many ways. The identity has to do with nationality, with religion, with gender, which also connects to another question. Here, there is an interesting part of the story. A reception center, among many more things, is a place that disrupts gendered expectations of the young men who are staying there. If my gender role is constructed among the expectation that I am the one who works, who lives out of the home, who takes care of the well-being of someone else, my being a client of welfare, by depending on pocket money, by being locked in, disrupts all I have been socialized as my role model. At the same time, it disrupts this, but it leaves nothing as an alternative to this. It does nothing in itself to support people in nourishing a less male-centered, if we like, view of their own selves and of their own identity. So in a way, it disrupts traditional masculinity without offering tools and skills to elaborate it in a more positive way, which I find interesting and critical in many ways. How many seconds?
1 minute.
Grief, to me, is a major part of the story. We may discuss as long as we like on how, inverted commas, legitimate the claims for asylum are. At the very least, all those who ended up there risk their lives along the way. At the very least, they are carrying heavy memories of violence they have gone through or they have been witness of, in the best case, which means a baggage, a luggage of grief, which typically has no institutional opportunities to be articulated, to be supported. The more services are carved, the less there is interest in this. But still the point is, as much as nobody of us would like to go back to what made them suffer in life, these things are haunting there at some point. They do creep out. With some of these people, I was constructed as trusted enough to vent out something of this. My idea is that to articulate it in a meaningful ethnographic text that does not expose people in any way, but tries to convey something of their lives, is a way of doing some service to them and to the condition they ended up in.
Thanks a lot on this note.
Sorry for the...
And I also apologize for being a tyrant with time. The good news is I think the book is available in open access online. So those online and those in the room, you can find it there. You can reach out to Paolo. We have many more seminars coming up at the Immigration Policy Center. There is another seminar on the 22nd of October on modern slavery and human rights in investment decisions. There is another seminar the week after. We have many calls that are open, so check out our website. See you at lunch, those in the room, and see you next time. Those online. Paolo, thanks a lot again for your time.